Okay, so now working on the other side. Being careful where to set my hand in case there's any paint. Sometimes when you get to this spot, it's good to let the rose dry before you keep going, just to make sure you've got a spot to put your hand and you don't risk sticking your hand in all of that paint. But play it by ear and see how you feel. Try and get that a little more centered there for you. Here we go. The nice thing about craft acrylic paints is they don't take long to dry at all. So you can leave it for about 10 minutes and come back and it should be fairly close to dry. Now when we're going to erase all of the guidelines, I'm going to leave it for a good half an hour to dry before I go in and erase the guidelines, just to be 100% sure that the paint is as dry as possible so I don't risk smudging anything when I'm erasing the lines. Go onto the other corner. We're just going to keep going throughout this whole corner. And then just like the inside where I'm thinking I'm going to do a little bit of white detail, kind of so in here, I think I'm going to do little tiny white dots just to create a little bit of a border there. I think I'll end up doing the same thing with this row. That's my thought right now anyway. But again, we'll see how it looks once the guidelines are erased and decide from there. Always remember that you decide when the piece is done. You can always add more detail. Very hard to take the detail away, so it's good to just kind of take a look at it and see how it looks, especially without the guidelines, because the guidelines are filling up spaces that might stand out to you when they're gone. Might make you see spaces that you want to fill when those guidelines are gone. So before we add any more detail after these little rows are done, I will let it dry for a good half hour and then go in and erase it. But we're getting closer to the finished product. There we go. All right. So that's where we're at so far. So now we're going to go in and do gray number 3. Now I'm looking at this end, and I'm still happy with how they look. I look at it from a few different angles to see if there's any little spaces I want to fill in there, and I'm pretty happy with it. So we will start back down in this corner, trying to get it into a good spot for you guys to see and at a good angle for me to paint. So I'm going to use the same size again because I know if I put a little extra paint on, I can create those larger dots. And because there's, you know, these dots are in there pretty tight, especially compared to here. They're still nice and even, so I'm happy with that, but I want to make sure that I don't overload it and risk having dots run together. So I'm just putting a little more paint on, letting it sit there for a little bit longer. And you'll notice too that once your lines, they almost start to get straight here, right? So once they start to get straight, it's going to feel like there's not as much room for a size increase. When you've got a smaller, tighter circle, you're definitely going to notice because it's going to feel like more of an angle. But the larger your circle gets, the more of a straight line it's going to feel like. So you have to be super careful before increasing your size too much because there's not as much curve creating space for you. I hope that makes sense. All right. So this is where it feels like you're getting a lot done because it progresses really quickly at this point, which feels really nice. This is where we can zone in a little bit. So remember to keep breathing. Holding your breath isn't going to help. You might just slow your breathing a little bit. You're going to feel like holding your breath might help you be a little more steady. But if you do it too much, you're actually going to start to potentially shake a little bit more. Or when you are breathing, you're going to find you're not as steady. And that can be really frustrating. All right, corner number 3. And then what I think I'm going to do, because I don't want to use the darkest, I want to keep the darkest, gray number 4, as these large inside dots. So once I finish this row, and all 4 corners have gray number 3 in here, I'm actually going to go back to gray number 2, and we're going to reverse the order here. So again, depending on the colors that you use, you could start back with gray number 2 and just repeat it again. That would work too. It's all personal preference. That's why it's so fun to do these things, right? Because everybody's piece is going to turn out just a little bit differently depending on the different choices they make, the spacing they use. So remember when you're creating your grid lines to create as many as you can without, them being right on top of each other and being too close together. But it's going to give you a lot of freedom to be able to add in these rows and kind of plan your spacing around when you want to hit some of these spots. So I usually go about 1 centimeter apart. Tends to be what I naturally do. Now, some people, like I said, will go through and they'll actually measure it out and they'll mark it out. So when they do their cross lines, they'll mark out every centimeter so that they can line their compass up with those lines. I don't do that. I just kind of eyeball it. So there we go. So now I'm going to go back to gray number 2. Oops, I have a space that I needed to fill over here. Sometimes you see it at a different angle. So I've got a little space over here that I wanted to fill. There we go. That feels better. All right, so now we go back to gray number 2. I'm probably even going to use the same tool again because I think that I have the same size tool again because I think I have some leeway as far as the amount of paint that I'm adding on. Yep, still can make it just a little bit bigger. And again, it's feeling straighter. So you want to make sure that you leave the space to be able to get another dot in there. So you're not going to be increasing the size of your tool as much as you would be. See how it's almost straight now? Feels straighter anyway, because it just is a longer distance and not as tight of a circle. There we go. I'll zoom in for this one. Get it over here a little bit. So really by loading different amounts of paint on your tools, you can create the larger dots. Again, this is where the test canvas is really going to come into play so that you can try your different tools and say, okay, if I really load it up with paint, what does that do to the dot size? Right, and just kind of play with it a little bit. There's that. 3. Feels so good and fast though, eh? When you get to this point. Oops, that's probably a little tight, but that's okay. Doesn't have to be perfect. I hope that you've enjoyed the process. I hope that it's given you some time to breathe and you have a little bit more confidence, because I am sure that your piece is looking beautiful. And really be nice to yourself. Sit back and look at it and go, you know what? I did that. I made that. Yes, I had help. We all have help when we started out. We all have help getting inspiration, and it doesn't mean anything negative towards your own ability to have that help, because no matter what, we're still creating something with our own hands that's going to be unique to us, because it's never going to be exactly the same as what someone else creates, because we are different people. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to gray number 1 again, and then I'm just going to keep repeating that as we go out further and further and further. So I am going to move up to a 4 now, but I'm not going to load a huge amount of paint on it. I want to see how it looks. Here we go. I think that looks all right. Stick that in there. Corner number 2. That wasn't anything rude. That was my elbow on the table. I'm always worried about the noises that come across. There we go. We're getting there. I'm thrilled with how this piece has turned out. That's part of the reason why I don't plan things too much, because usually when I do plan things, it doesn't work out the way I planned it anyway. And it's just fun to see your ideas come together. All right, so now I'm going to go back to gray number 2. And then the final little tips in the corner will be gray number 3 again. So I'm going to stick with my size 4 tool again. Again, play around with that. Make sure that you know how the size is going to be for you. So like I said, once I'm done these corners, I'm going to let it sit for a good half an hour, maybe even an hour. The longer you leave it dry, the better. Okay, the less risk you're going to have of smudging any of the paint when you get rid of the lines. Now, let's talk about getting rid of the lines for a second. So get yourself a good eraser. There's a bunch of different ones. I actually ended up going to Michael's and spending about $10 and buying a few different kinds of erasers to find out what ones I liked the best. So if you used regular pencil, just any good eraser, like the white gum erasers are good. I'm trying to look and see if I have my favorite eraser out in front of me, and I don't see it, but I'll show it to you when we erase the lines. There are kneaded erasers that can work well. Lydia May, she actually has a great tutorial on her YouTube where she talks about the different erasers and how they take care of the lines and what kind of, success she's had with erasing lines with different erasers. So it's going to be some trial and error. Now, if you had a chalk pencil that you used, then you can, oops, I want to fill that in a little bit. Then you can always use a cotton swab. Cotton swab isn't going to work with a regular pencil, but it will work with the charcoal or the chalk pencil. And worst case scenario, if the eraser that you use doesn't get rid of the lines, then you can always go in with some black paint. Here we go. Oh, I think it looks good. Then you can always go in with some black paint and your tiny paintbrush and get rid of that stuff. So technically this part is all really dry. I could go in and erase this now, but then I'd have the eraser shavings to deal with, and that could get into this wet paint around the edge. If you used regular pencil to draw your guidelines and you did not have a charcoal pencil, please, please, please give it a good extra half hour to dry just in case, because you're going to have to put a little more pressure on the eraser and maybe go over it a few extra times. So make sure that you give it a little bit extra time. So I'm going to let this dry for about a half an hour, and then when we come back, we'll erase the guidelines and we'll start doing some top dots and figure out what kind of detail to add in here. All right, time for the fun part, to get rid of these guidelines. So this is the eraser that I use. It's called General's Tri-Tips. I find that it doesn't leave a lot of residue behind. It cleans off really easily. Some of the erasers are plasticky and oily and almost create some changes in color of the paint. I find that my paint stays the same color. It doesn't pull off any of the paint. So these ones are my favorites. I got them in a pack of, I think, 3 of them for $6 or $7 at Michael's if you're looking for them, but just find one that you really like. And here, let me zoom all the way in because you can still see that there's some lines in here. So I'm going through every little spot. I usually have to go over the entire piece a couple of times, but it's crazy how even just that little bit, you can see the difference in how it looks without the lines. So what I will often do is follow where I know the guidelines already are, all the way out to the edge, or start with the circles in the inside and just kind of do the same thing when I see where they are. And then I will very often have to go back and do kind of a second run. So actually, let's pull that off, and I'm going to zoom back out while I do the rest of this. All right, so now we start going around. Even if I don't see any spots, I kind of just erase the whole thing just to be safe. Sometimes I'll even use like a soft brush to brush it all off if I need to. And sometimes it's just for fun. But see now how you can really start to see more of the design. So noticing over here where those lines are, still very faint, nothing major there. But when you erase them, you can really see your space and see where there is going to be space to potentially add some detail. So at the beginning of this tutorial, I promised you swoops, so we're gonna do some swoops. And I'm gonna show you on the test canvas first, because partly because I don't do swoops a lot on canvas, or I haven't, because I just don't do a lot of canvas. So I wanna make sure that I'm gonna use the right size tool and get kind of my technique down pat before trying it on this, because I've made it so far on this one without making any mistakes. So I'm going to try and keep that streak going here. Sometimes the lines get really faint too because you're rubbing your hands on the piece as you're painting. So I still kind of do like a full once over, even if it's in a spot that I don't necessarily know for sure if there are any guidelines there, just in case there's something that's really, really faint that I have missed or I've forgotten about. So there we go. I think that looks pretty good. It's amazing how just something so simple as guidelines can make such a big difference. So you might look at your piece and say, it's done. And that is totally okay. But we're gonna keep going on this one at least. And I'll show you what I'm gonna do. Okay, first things first, we're gonna start putting the first top dots in the center here, and then we'll start doing some swoops. So first things first, so the center dots are gray number 4. So I'm gonna go into my gray number 3, and I'm gonna choose a tool that is just slightly smaller than the one that I used before. So I used this size. So now I'm going into my little jar of tools, and I'm probably going to choose one that's about that size. I always kind of put it on here. That's even a little bit big. So here, let me actually move this down here. So see when I put this down in the middle, how much of an outline is kind of around it. I know the paint is going to spread farther around than the tool. The dot's going to be bigger than the actual tool. So I want to go down even a little bit smaller. So let's try this one. I like the look of that one much, much better. So I'm going into gray number 3, and then I'm just going to go right over and do that top dot there. So I'm going to repeat that with the next row as well, finding the tool that is just slightly smaller than this one. So I'm trying to remember which one I used. So I think I'm going to go with, yeah, I'm going to go with a 5, maybe even a 4 actually. Remembering that each of these dark dots is going to have 3 layers of top dots, 4 layers, sorry, of top dots. So in these sections of the painting, it should feel nice and bumpy when it's all dry, which will be very satisfying. So you see how I'm still leaving a fairly decent size edging around there to still see the dark. You can make it bigger if you want to, but then you run the risk of not seeing a lot of your original base color. And really when it comes to, when you're using like really brilliant blues and especially reds, because reds go pink, you could start off with a piece with a lot of red in it. And then if you make your top dots too big, then you could run the risk of making it look pink instead of red. One thing to keep in mind with that as well is you'll see a lot of dot artists use darker reds on red top dots, or use orange and yellow to try and lighten it up a little bit. So just know that just adding white is not the only direction to go with that. You can mix other colors and maybe make it go from dark red to kind of an orangey red. That's really personal preference there, but just keep in mind that when you add the red, it is going to make it pink. So if you're trying to keep the red as a focal point and a dominant color, you want to make sure that you don't add too much white to it. It can still look beautiful, especially if we're doing like a monochrome piece like this, but just kind of have that heads up. Okay, so we're doing our top dots here. And I'm actually going to keep going the whole way out because this is not going to take a long time to dry. By the time I'm ready to go in and do my swoops, most of these should be dry. So I'm just going to back out a little bit here. And maybe we'll turn it this way so you can see it a little bit better. I hope that's okay. And now, let's see. So you're just looking again for a tool that is slightly smaller, that's going to give you kind of that edge. Now I'm not putting the tool right down on the surface either. I'm just waiting until that top dot spreads out to the size that I really want it to be. That one's a little bit small, so I'm going to make that one a little bit bigger. I really want that dark gray to shine through and create a really cool effect here. So making sure that you've got a distinct edge is going to help a lot with that. It's so funny, right? Because like I said, you can not do any top dots and sit and look and go, wow, the piece is done. But then as soon as you start adding top dots, you kind of start to look at the piece and go, oh yeah, it was so not done. Because it looks so good when you add these details. It's so, especially when you get to the very last, which is going to be a top dot, a very tiny top dot of white. We're going to use probably the smallest tool that we have, and it's going to be very, very subtle, but you'll definitely see a difference. I'm excited for you to, I remember the first time I did my top dots, I kind of sat back and kept doing the ooh, ooh, oh, that's pretty. Yeah, that's why it's so good for your confidence, you know, just learning the techniques and practicing the basics. It's amazing what you're going to come up with as far as ideas for future projects and color combos and all of that sort of stuff. All right, almost done this layer of top dots. Once this layer of top dots is done, what I am going to do is move this aside, and we're going to grab the test canvas and we're going to practice some swoops, because I want to, like I said, make sure that I'm using the right size tool, and I want to make sure that I've got my technique down pat on canvas so that I know it's going to at least have a really good shot of turning out the way that I intend it to. So already a subtle difference, eh? Just by adding those top dots. One thing, when you're looking at the light reflecting, you could add your top dots all to one side to kind of make it look like they're bubbles. It's completely up to you. You can kind of have some fun with it. It's really kind of cool. All right, so I'm going to move this aside, and I'm going to grab my test canvas. And I'm going to grab my test paints again too, because I just want to make sure that I'm going to make sure that I have a good color that's nice and easy to see. So I'm just picking a random tool now just to kind of see. I think it's going to be larger than I want it to be. Actually, that might not be too bad. Okay, so it doesn't spread like it does on wood or canvas. On wood or like ceramic or glass. So this actually might be a really good size for the spaces that I have. So you're holding the tool down, letting a lot of the paint drip off, and then you're slowly dragging it down until the paint runs out. So you dip, hold the dotting tool down, and then slowly drag it down. So I think that was some pretty good dumb luck, if you ask me. And I can understand now when I'm feeling it, I can feel the little bits of bumps from the canvas. So I think I'm actually really good to go. I hope that makes sense though. So actually here, let me do a couple more. So let's look at a couple different size tools. I'm going to go into a smaller size tool here just to show you the difference. I'm going to load the paint, put it down. So still a good size too. This one actually might be better. Because I'm actually able to still drag the paint down quite a ways, and it makes it a little skinnier, so I might have less risk of having the swoops run together, which might be nice to have them a little bit narrower. I find that I often will overestimate the amount of space that I have to fill, and usually kind of go a little bit larger than I probably should. I'm going to try one last size. I'm trying my smallest dotting stylus. Dipping it in the paint, holding it down. That's cute too. I think that's a little bit small for this piece, but I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so I think after trying a few different ones, really good to try a few different ones with your tools just to see. Here, I'll show you a really big one just to make it different. So that's the size for a big one. Definitely bigger than I want to have. So I think I'm gonna go for this middle kind of one. I'm really happy with that. So that goes back aside, that paint gets closed up, and back we go here. So this is not dry yet, so I am gonna let it dry. I'm gonna give it about 15-20 minutes, let it dry, and then come back. The reason for that is that I wanna make sure that I have a really stable surface that I can put my hand down on while I'm doing the swoops to do the dragging. Because if I don't have that stability, I'm risking my hand shaking or jerking or twitching or anything like that and throwing off the swoops. Now I'm looking in here. I don't want to do a swoop in here because I think that would make it just too busy. So I think for this middle one here, I'm not going to do a swoop. I am going to do a swoop in here, and we'll do a couple swoops on the outside here and a couple on the outside here. But I'm going to leave this one. Maybe, am I? No, we're going to do swoops there too. Yeah, we're going to do swoops in here too. I'm just going to go with the super smallest one and pull that down in that way. Okay, so this is dry, so we can start some swoops. Now, before we start some swoops, I'm actually going to do top dots as I'm doing the swoops going on the outside. So I'm going to do the third top dot using gray number 2 for that center one. So I have to pick the size tool that I want to use, slightly smaller because I want to have about the same kind of edging there. So this one should be just about right. There we go. So now we have to decide on the color of swoops for the middle. So what I look at is this is gray number 2, this is gray number 1, and then we've got gray number 2 again here. So I think I'm going to use gray number 3. Again, this is just my personal preference on what to do for my color separations and stuff. But put together whatever colors you think are going to look good. And because it's going to be a swoop, it's not like it's dots. They're going to meld together or anything. So just kind of trust your gut where that's concerned. So I'm going to use the smallest tool that I have. I'm dipping it in the paint. Then I'm going to hold it here, and then I'm going to slowly bring it down like that. It almost looks even still too big, but that's okay. So I'm going to let it sit a little bit longer here and then pull it down. Okay, so that's the trick. I got to not leave it sit as long so that I get a nice thin little swoop there. There we go. It's nice because it is fairly quick, right? So you get some instant gratification pretty quick. And I'm not putting quite as much paint on as I did with the first couple. There we go. Center swoops done. So now I'm going to do the top dots in here. The third top dot using, again, gray number 2 on that inner row. So I'm looking to see what size I want to use. I actually think I'm going to use one of my dotting stylus tools again. This one is a fairly small one so that I don't make it too big in here. Just like that. Might actually make it just a little bit bigger because I still want to have room for 2 more top dots on there, but that's okay. So just adding it again in the center, making sure to still leave a little bit of an edge of the previous color. And the positioning of your top dots can change the whole look of a piece too. I've seen some people put all of the top dots lined up with the bottom edge, so they almost look like other little petals of a flower. You can do that. You can set it up however you want it to look. So many different types of things to try. So make sure you're spending some time on Pinterest as well to kind of get some ideas and look at other artists, see what they're up to, and see what that inspires you to do. All right, so in here, I'd like to do 3 swoops. So when I look at my sizes of swoops, I'm gonna look at my test canvas again here. I'm thinking that for this section, I could do 3 very nicely of this size here, the middle size, which is the same tool that I just did that top dot with. So I'm gonna move my test canvas again, come back here, and let's see what happens. Now, so I have gray number 3 and gray number 1 right here. So I'm thinking my center swoop, I'm gonna do gray number 2 and then maybe gray number 1 on either side there. That's my thought. So I'm gonna do the gray number 2 in the middle first, just to get my centers where I want them to be. So, letting a lot of paint drip down and then slowly coming down like that. Ooh, that one turned out pretty. Try again. See if we can keep a good streak going of pretty swoops. 3. Ah, lovely. There we go. Oops, move it into the middle a little bit more again. These swoops are so satisfying. Oh, there's a little bit of something there, probably an eraser shaving. Get out of there. It's stuck on there, good. All right, we'll get rid of that after. It's moved out of the way at least. I'm gonna clean off my tool because I left it sitting in the paint a little bit long. Grab some paint. And even as I'm looking at this, it makes me wonder if I even need more swoops than that. Maybe just the single swoop will be good. So let's wait and see. I think I kind of like just the single swoops. I don't know about you guys. If you want to add more to yours, go right ahead. So you're just really doing it slow. I found that my whole swoop game changed once I saw how slow you move the tool down and how long you leave it sit there. So I used to do swoops by adding the dot to the canvas and then using a toothpick or a push pin to pull the paint down. And my goodness, this is just so much easier. And then slowly pull it down. Be smarter than me and hold on to your canvas. Yeah, I think I like just the single swoops. I don't know about you guys. That's what I'm thinking. All right, so then in here, I'm gonna do more swoops. And I think I'm going to do gray number 1. Throw some lightness in there. The fun part with swoops too is if you wanted to, you could come in and add like a little top dot on the little ends of each of your swoops if you want to add a little dimension there, or add another smaller swoop on top. That works too. Whatever you want to do. Swoop. Swoop. So again, I'm using the lightest gray that I have. Let it sit for a second and then slowly bringing it down. Let it sit and slowly bring it down. Oh. And we can actually go back here. Maybe I'll do that before I get going too fast. Nah, we'll keep going with the swoops. Hold it down. Slowly bring it down. I'm going to clean off the tool again because it was starting to carry a little bit more paint than I wanted it to. Load her up again. And again. Oh, this is so satisfying. Okay, here, I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit and see if we can get you a better angle of me doing these swoops. Let's give that a shot. Is that going to work there? Let's move it a little bit because then I can do this. All right, let's see how this works. Let's see how this looks. So I've got my finger on the bottom corner to hold it steady for me this time. I'm learning my lesson. Hold it down and then slowly bring it down. Oops, didn't come down quite enough. There we go. Cleaning off my tool again. I think I like just the single swoops. I think that's more than enough. Slowly bring it down. This one's probably got a little more paint on it than I want it to. That's okay. Still looks all right. Gonna clean off my tool again. Be on the safe side, you might want to clean it off every single time, but play it by ear. You're gonna get to know really quickly when you even look at your tool and go, oh, there's too much paint on that. I do that a lot where I'll just look at it and go, nope, gotta clean it off. All right. Now, as you start to turn around, you are gonna get to a point where you may feel like you have to rest your hand in some other paint. So either take a break and let it dry before you do the other half of the canvas, or just be really careful before you put your hand down. Slow. I count with this too, I realized. I kind of count to 4. I'll show you what I mean here. So I dip, I hold it down, and then I pull 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 more spaces. 1, 2, 3. Oops, that one didn't pull down very far at all. I'm just turning my tool to see if there's enough paint on there to... it's good enough. And then here, a little bit more paint on it this time, so this one should be a little bit. 2, 3, 4. There we go. So, zooming out and giving you that whole look there, looks pretty good. So I'm going to do one more set of swoops around the outside, but first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and put the third level of, the second level of top dots. So it's going to be the third level of paint on there. I'm going to switch and use my, I'm going to use my number 2, I think. So I'm using gray number 2 and just being very careful not to touch the swoops that I just did. It's incredible how this contrasts is so gradual. And I'm making very careful when I put my right hand down to not stick my hand in those swoops that we just did. Oops, a little bit more paint there, I think, would be nice. Bit more there, and we go there, and I am going to do these ones as well, and then we'll do the last row of swoops. So I'm going to go with a 4, still using again my, I'm going to go with a 3. I'm going to still using gray number 2, and still keeping that edge there. The nice part is adding these details tends to go fairly quickly, which feels good. It feels like you're making a lot of headway. And you know what? I said I was going to add some of the little white dots. I still might, but as of right now, I'm not really feeling like it needs it too much, but it might just finish it off really nicely. But we'll see. That one I need a little bit more paint on. There we go. All right, so then I'm going to do the last set of top dots out here. I'm going to use my number 4, still using gray number 2, so my second lightest gray. The next layer of top dots will be the lightest gray, and then the final piece of the top dots is going to be a little tiny white dot. And it's going to make these look like they're just jumping right off of the canvas. Really making it pop. Looking pretty good though. I'm pretty happy. I hope you guys are happy with your creations. I hope you're having fun with it. There we go. There we go. Okay, so all the top dots are done. So now I'm going to do the last bit of swoops. I'm going to have to kind of figure out how I'm going to do the swoops in these couple little ones, but we'll figure that out as we go. In the meantime, I'm going to do a bigger swoop. So I'm going to use a slightly larger dotting tool. I'm going to use this end. When we did our test canvas, it was this first set here. So it's just a little bit thicker. It'll hold a little bit more paint. And I think I'm going to stick with the second lightest gray. So I'm going to be doing this gray that's right in here and right in here. All right, so let's see here. I'll do a couple from close up. Let's see if I can get you down nice and close again. Let's go right there. That should work for an angle for you, I hope. Yeah, that should work. Okay, here we go. Loading up some paint. Hold it down. And then, oh, it doesn't travel very far. That's okay. It doesn't have to. So I'm going to hold down a little bit more paint, maybe start moving it a little bit faster. That worked a little bit better. Move it a little faster, or start moving it a little sooner, I guess you could say. It's really trial and error. So lots of paint, moving it a lot faster, pulling it right down. There we go. Okay, and I'm actually going to go back to this one here because I think I can still kind of get right to the edge with this one. I'm being very careful not to put my hand in the paint. Oh, that one looks nice too. Right on the edge. All right, so now I'm going to zoom you back out, pull you up here with me, and we'll go over here to this side and get this side done. So I'm holding it with my left hand a little bit on the corner. I'm just going to hold this up here, pull that down. Nice Nice and slow. You can hear it scraping on the canvas. Looks good. 2 more full swoops. We can always touch that up a little bit. Sorry, I'm in a terrible angle there for you again. And then final one. So not holding it down quite as long, pulling it down. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, based on how wide this is, I'm gonna use a smaller tool like I did with the smaller one, the tiny ones in the middle. I'm just gonna start it here. Oops. And let it pull down like that. So it's not gonna look exactly the same as the other ones. That one I'm gonna skip. This one I'm actually gonna grab a toothpick, and I think I'm literally just going to do a really quick whoop, just to give it the look. I'm gonna do the same kind of right here, just a little point and a little point there. Might look like another dot more than anything, and that's okay too. There we go. And then I'm going to spin this around, and then this last one I'll just do a nice quick one here. And in it goes. There we go. All right. So let's get it centered in here for you again. What do you think? Looks pretty good, eh? So now you can wait until things dry and then go back in and add the third layer, because things are still a little bit wet. And I'm not really sure that I want to put any kind of border on there. I kind of like it just the way it is. So let's leave it at that. So I'm going to let this dry, and when I come back, then we'll do the 4th level of top dots. We'll let that dry, and then do the final little white dots, and we should be good to go. Once that dries, then we can varnish and sign our work. And then we're gonna be done. How exciting is that? I hope you like it. I hope you're having so much fun following along so far. Okay, so time to let it dry. Okay, so now we're ready for our next layer of top dots, which is gonna be the lightest gray. And so for the center dot, again, I'm just going a little bit smaller than the other one. So just try your tools, because you still want to have that edge of each color coming through. There's that one. And all of these are at the same level, which is nice, because then that's going to be too big. I had a little too much paint on there, so I'm going to switch to a toothpick. So I may have overestimated the amount of space, or underestimated the amount of space that I needed here to be able to effectively do some top dots on these small ones, but that's okay too. It's not going to be the end of the world. I'll still have enough space to be able to put a little white dot on there to finish it all off. Here, let me zoom in for you a little bit here. Go around this next part, the next row. I'll move this over for you, sorry. This one. This one. Oops. It's hard with a rectangle one because it's going to change position depending on how I spin it. Because we're using such a small amount of paint, by the time we get out and do the outer edges, the inner ones might be dry enough to do the white. Then we can let it sit and do the final dry to be able to then let it sit for a little bit and then put on our varnish. So let's talk varnish. You can use any number of things. You can use spray varnish if you're going to use, so you can use paint-on varnish. It can be just polyurethane that you get at like a hardware store. I typically buy an artist varnish because I want a nice matte finish. You can decide if you want gloss, satin, semi-gloss. I've bought folk art varnish from Amazon. I've also bought Liquitex artist varnish from Michaels. Always nice to go to Michaels when you've got a coupon that you can use to get you some money off too, right? But that's usually my preference. Anything that's going to protect it is the idea here. We want to make sure that we're protecting it so that the color doesn't come off, that it doesn't bleed off or wipe off, and that you can wipe it clean if you ever need to, if dust ever builds up at all. And there we go. Oops, I'm sorry. I did it again. I did it again, you guys. I'm so sorry. Okay. So let's start here. So then again, the next step after this is going to be doing the final white top dot. And when we do the final white top dot, we will also sign our work. Now to sign, you can use a gel pen, you can use a Sharpie. I have some paint pens that I bought off of Amazon. I think I got a set of like 36 for about $15. Oops, I did it again. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so sorry. There we go. So I use little paint pens to sign it. That one's even actually going on the side. There's going to be a little bump there on the side. All right, so there we go. Okay, so I lied. This is not dry yet on the inner sections. Didn't dry that quickly, but you can already see the dimension that this adds to everything with those top dots, eh? There we go. Let's zoom all the way in and then all the way out. Isn't that satisfying? So then with one little bit of white on there, then this is going to be done. Your first project, maybe not your first project with me, our first project together. It's so exciting. So we'll let this dry, then do the final top dots and sign our work, and then we will be good to let it do the final dry and varnish. Okay, so this is dry and we are now ready for our final bit of our top dot. So this time I'm going to use white. And I am going to, for the most part, be using this small tool. A couple of times I might use a really tiny toothpick. So let's zoom in. So get a really good look of how it looks now. Maybe I'll even take a screenshot. Can I do that while I'm on the phone, while I'm doing this? Nope, couldn't do it. Okay, so I will take a still photo and see if I can put this one next to the finished product and see. So I'll just try and get some good images here. All right, so now I'm gonna add the top dots. So I'm gonna zoom right into the center section so you can see just a little top dot there, right? So subtle, so subtle. So now I'm gonna find a toothpick, and I threw them all out a second ago. So I apologize for the noise while I grab a couple more. All right, here we go. So I've got a really nice sharp toothpick, and I'm going to use white again. So these are all going to be white dots now. Oops, that might have been a little too sharp maybe, or just put too much paint on it. So just that tiny bit of white. Do you see that on there? Can't get much closer. Let me see if I move it closer. Oh, it's gonna get blurry. All right, let's try this. No. Okay, so this toothpick, sometimes when it's really, really sharp, the paint doesn't stay on the end. All right, let me find another toothpick. Let's try this again. All right, here we go. One of the frustrations, gotta be versatile, right? There we go, that's a little bit better. Yay! It's hard to see here, so let me actually even back up just a little bit. There we go. So just putting the tiniest of white dots on here. You're going to kind of look at it for a little while and say, why am I doing this? I can barely even tell that this is happening. Is it doing anything? But I promise you, the way I kind of explain it is, how do I explain it? When you look at it after you've got all the top dots, you kind of look at it and say, it looks different. There's something different. But what is it? What's different? That's how you know it's just got a little something extra. Here we go. For these outer ones here, I'll be able to, I'm still going to use the toothpick for the first outer one. So one of the options here is you could go in with some white or with one of your colors and do some really tiny dots in here to kind of create a little bit of a border. I really like the look of this the way that it is, so I don't really want to add any more on it. However, it would look pretty cool. Definitely would look cool. So then here, let's go over here and we'll do, and you can almost even go and do every other one. And then slowly add those dots. These are the teeny tiny little details that I remember when I was first learning them, I was watching going, okay, this seems like a lot of work for nothing. I don't understand. However, once you see it completely finished, you'll have that kind of, ooh, I get it moment. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this process so far. All we have left to do is to sign our work after these top dots and wait for it to dry and then varnish. And then it'll be ready to go up on a fridge or be displayed on whatever you've painted on. I really hope that you've enjoyed the process. I hope that it has inspired you. I hope that it has given you some confidence and showed you that you are good at this, that you can do it. Nothing breaks my heart more than hearing people say, I'm not talented enough. I'm not good enough at art to do this. I never did good in art class. I did good in art theory class, but I never did good in art class because I had a really hard time coming up with ideas of my own. I couldn't draw pictures very well. I had a hard time coming up with ideas of my own. I didn't understand inspiration. You know, I was the good math student. I was not the good art student. I did a lot of art. I went to art camp every year for 5 years when I was going through grade school and high school. But I never thought of myself as an artsy person. There were lots of other people where I'm like, that guy's going to be an artist. That guy's going to grow up and he's going to be a professional artist. And I would never thought of myself as that person. I thought of myself as someone who kind of just dabbles in stuff and likes to play with it, but never really created a lot of stuff. Like at art camp, I took leather sculpture once and I tried to make a dragon, and it was this poor dragon. If there was ever a dragon that existed that looked like this poor thing that I created, oh my goodness, that would be just so sad to think that a creature like that existed. Or I did pottery and I made an ashtray. Didn't even know anybody in my life that smoked, you know, like little things like that. But I knew I liked to create. I knew I liked being creative. I think that's why I liked knitting and crocheting, and it's why I like this. There are patterns, but you can still do your own thing, right? So here, I'm gonna just zoom out here for a minute. Let's have a look. I hope that you like it. I hope that you are proud of what you've created. And it's time to sign our work. So if you have a gel pen, you can use that. You can use a little bit of paint on a tiny paintbrush and use that. I have a set of paint markers. I bought these paint pens from Amazon, and I want to say that I got 24 or 36 of them in a set for 10, 15 bucks maximum. So they exist if you want them, or you can use one of your dotting tools and dot your initials and the date on there. It's completely up to you what you want to do. But make sure you sign your art. Sign it, sign it, sign it. Because can you imagine if you start doing some stuff in 10 years into the future, they find your art and you're famous and you gotta give yourself credit for it. And it's something you should be proud of. Creating something beautiful and adding some beauty to the world, whether it ever leaves your apartment or not, it matters because you're going to feel better and that is going to transfer out to the people that you interact with. So I hope that you've had a really, really good time. Our last step is going to be to varnish this. I'm going to leave this dry for about a half an hour. Even though we put such a tiny amount of paint on with those top dots, I still don't want to take the risk that the varnish is going to smudge any of it. So I'm going to give it a really good chunk of time to dry before doing anything else. So I'm just giving my paint pen a really, really good shake. And then I got to test it. These paint pens are those ones where you kind of push down and then the paint comes out. So then I'm going to sign it right here. JM 2020. There we go. So I'm going to let this dry. We'll come back and the last piece of this tutorial is going to be varnishing, but sit and really look at it for a little bit. Look at what you've created. Enjoy it. Give yourself the credit for it. You made this. I wasn't there holding your hand. Nobody else was. You did this. And you created something beautiful that I hope makes you smile. So we'll be back in a little bit. I'm going to pause this video and it'll be a very quick transition for you. So let it dry for a bit and then we'll varnish. Okay, so one thing I forgot to mention is when it comes to varnishing, you want to have a fairly soft brush. It's not necessary, but it can make life a little bit easier. It's going to soak up a little more varnish, reduce the brush marks, anything like that. I got these ones, I think, at the dollar store. You can get some nice soft ones at Michael's for probably $5 or so too. And the thing to remember is to always clean them really good. It's even almost more important than cleaning the paints out of there. At least I found, as far, you know, a professional artist might tell you something different, but someone with training, but I found that it's more important to keep my varnish brushes clean than my paint brushes. The paint ones, you know, soap and water tends to dissolve it really well, but you kind of have to work it a little bit with the varnish. So I am using Liquitex Artist Varnish. I got this at Michael's. I'm pretty sure I think it's around $30. So with a coupon, it's not too bad. And this stuff goes really, really far. I've used this on almost every single thing that I've made for the last year and a half, and I still have half a bottle left. So unless you're doing a ton of really big canvases, you're not going to go through it very fast. So I just use a little palette. I never put more than I need. I try to underestimate a little bit. And then this soft brush just soaks up a lot of varnish, so it's going to go a long way. So then I just try and do long sweeping strokes from one side to another. You're going to notice, and you're going to want to get up close and take a look for any bubbles that are kind of building up in the corners, in between dots, things like that. So on the next stroke here, I will move you closer to and show you what I'm seeing when these little bubbles pop up. So let's go down here. I'm gonna hope that this works. So let's see here. So I'm gonna tilt this again. Let's see if we can get close. So a long, slow. And then see over here, there's kind of some bubbles in there. You can kind of just want to pull them out a little bit. I don't think it's gonna film properly for me to be able to actually show you. I'm gonna try and see if I even see them. I haven't seen too many. I saw them more in the first little batch. So let's just see. You can kind of see them. If you get little, you want to make sure that you get rid of them because they'll cause kind of like a milky color almost. So just get in really, really close to your piece and look in between the dots, because when the dots are raised up, it's easy for varnish to get stuck between them. You don't want to overbrush and do too many passes of it, because that's going to increase some air, just like you don't want to really shake the bottle of varnish before you use it or stir it very much. There shouldn't be any need to stir it, actually. So just get up nice and close to it and make sure, oh, sorry for bumping the camera there. Make sure that you don't have any of those bubbles. It's not the end of the world, especially on a grayscale piece, but you're gonna notice it because it can dull your color sometime. Now, we're gonna do a second coat on this as well in about a half an hour. And on the second coat, I always go in the opposite direction. So on the second coat, I will turn it and I will go in this direction. You'll see that. But for now, we're gonna let this dry. I'm gonna give it about a half an hour, then I should be able to come back and do the second coat of varnish. This is a matte varnish again, by the way. Sorry, before we move on. This is a matte varnish. You can use satin, you can use high gloss, whichever kind of varnish you're gonna use. I would recommend testing it on your test canvas, put some dots down, play around with it a little bit, and then varnish, use the 3 varnishes over and see what you like best. And then just find whichever one is your preference. There's no wrong answer. Okay, time for the second coat of varnish. Using the same brush. And this time I'm going in this direction. The reason for that is that when you have little bumps and stuff, unless you get in there and kind of swirl your brush around, there's little pieces that aren't going to get covered properly. So making sure you put a second coat on in the opposite direction will make sure that the whole piece is covered for you. I know I've said this a few times already, but I really hope that you've enjoyed yourself doing this. I hope that it's given you some confidence that, you know, the things, maybe there's some things that you think you can't do, that if you tried and you practiced with it, might be something you really enjoy, especially if it's something you really enjoy. If it's something you would like to spend more time doing in your life, give it a shot and do it just for fun and see how your skill changes over time. Because practice comes easier, and there's motivation behind it that's completely different, right? If it's something that you really want to do. And there we go. So first project, this one is done. Let me know how you make out. Let me know if you have any questions. If there's anything that I forgot, if you have suggestions of camera angles, topics that I should talk about, anything like that for the next tutorial, please let me know. And I hope you really had a good time. Thanks for spending all this time with me. Sending you lots of love.